I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime Magazine. Welcome to the second episode of HumanSec, which is all about securing humans. I'm here today with Otavio Freire at Safeguard Cyber, the industry's first and only comprehensive collaboration, chat, and social media security platform. Also joining us is Alyssa Abdullah, PhD, also known as Dr. J, Deputy Chief Security Officer and Senior Vice President of Emerging Corporate Security Solutions at MasterCard. To learn more about MasterCard, visit mastercard.com. Dr. J, Otavio, great to have both of you with us today.
Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
It's great to be here, Steve. Great to see you. Thank you.
So we're here today to talk about social media collaboration tools and security, a very hot topic. Before we jump in, like the rest of the nation, people across the globe, I was just reading front page New York Times, cyber attack forces a shutdown of a top U.S. pipeline. It's in our cybercrime feed today. Let me just read this quickly. And Otavio, I'd love to just get some quick thoughts from you before we jump in here today. One of the nation's largest pipelines, which carries refined gasoline and jet fuel from Texas up the East Coast to New York, was forced to shut down after being hit by a ransomware attack, in a vivid demonstration of the vulnerability of energy infrastructure to cyber attacks. We don't see a lot of cyber attacks of this magnitude. Otavio, what are you thinking?
I agree with you, Steve. The question is, until what point are we going to let this progress? I mean, I don't know if you recall, end of last year, there was one attack after another of ransomware against a school system right here in Fairfax County, for example, was an example of a successful attack. Was seen against. Then there was another wave against hospitals, and now critical infrastructure, which some would argue, because Colonial Pipeline transfers 45% of oil and gas on the eastern seaboard, that it's the biggest cybersecurity attack on critical infrastructure in the United States. And FireEye and others being able to attribute it to DarkSide, which is a for-profit hacker group, a cyber hacker group, criminal hacking group out of Russia. One could argue that it's not the Russian government, but they continue to operate within these countries. And it's not just Russia, it's China, it's Brazil, it's North Korea, where the local governments don't enforce just crime laws, and they can continue to operate. So hopefully this is a turning point. To your point, Steve, it's just really the largest we've ever seen in terms of impact. It's not clear what the energy market's going to do over the coming weeks over this. And maybe it's high tide for actual response and force these countries to watch their criminal activity.
So, Dr. J, one thing that's troubling me is, the lack of details. Colonial is under less pressure than a publicly traded company might be to reveal details. And I've, looked at a lot of sources. I'm not seeing a lot of information coming forward.
I don't necessarily think we necessarily need it right now. And I'm going to tell you why. I have a different take. You said, kind of one of the biggest, potentially, it sounds like it's going to be maybe one of the biggest ransomware attacks. My belief so far with what I've heard is I would probably bet it goes down to something that's very basic. And that's the whole point of all of this is a reminder that there is no industry, there is no sector that is immune to cybersecurity attacks and ransomware attacks. We talk a lot about spear phishing as well. They're finding different ways and different means to get to us. But when we start peeling back this onion, I can almost bet you there will be some basic cybersecurity tenets that we may find we need to continuously address.
Right. Well, a lot more to come on that for sure. I think everybody's, grappling with it. It's a Monday morning. Dr. J, to get started on today's topic, there's constant media coverage and talk from experts in our field about humans being the weakest link. We hear that over and over again, and we need human firewalls. But That's mainly been in the context of training employees to be aware of phishing scams and social engineering. And of course, that's very important. But why have we had such a lack of security around social media, mobile chat, collaboration tools that these very same employees use every day?
So I'm going to separate social media from the mobile chat and collaboration tools. I think there is a different view on mobile chat and collaboration because we use those throughout our enterprise. So while we may have, or companies have selected ones that they want to use, we sometimes find that our employees may use others. When I think in terms of social media, though, those are really meant for your sales, your marketing group, those sometimes those type of groups. And so it's not an enterprise wide, hey, everyone can jump on and use this to help you, further your work. So I think that may be why we may find that there is a real lack of security or enterprise posture, which is why we kind of tend to fall back on non-disclosure agreements. We tend to fall back on, our corporate security policies and things like that to make sure that we are, looking at it from a larger perspective, a larger, more enterprise perspective. The mobile chat and the collaboration tools have probably more controls around them because they're enterprise wide. But social media was actually meant for social, for personal, for outside use. And so not the true intent of maybe an enterprise use unless you're one of those type of companies that is really doing a lot of marketing and a lot of things externally. I think that might be the reason for the lack. But I also want to switch and kind of turn this upside down too, Steve, and say, when we talk about lack of security around social media and mobile chat and those collaboration tools, things that are outside, when I think about policies and things like that, we also have to make sure that we are not using our corporate email addresses to log into those things because that's a whole different security, onion that we have to, kind of unpeel. So that's another aspect. I might talk about that a little bit more today. That's another aspect to this as well when you think about social media and how we secure it.
Right. Well, and we also have to remember there's only one Dr. J. So, you're not at every company and they're not as secure as you are. I can guarantee you that. Otavio, what are the mobile chat, social media, and collaboration tools that we should be most concerned about, either because they have the largest user bases or they've been exploited by hackers? Would it be LinkedIn, Twitter, Teams, Slack, Zoom? Give us a quick rundown.
Yeah, like Dr. J, probably makes sense to think in terms of a framework we separate them both, right? But in terms of growth, Microsoft Teams is literally eating up the enterprise, growing 700% per quarter. By Microsoft's own admission, the fastest growing product they've ever had. You can think about Word and Excel, like it beats all the adoption of all those tools. So, with a lot of usage comes a lot of risk. But in terms of the riskiest, if you go to the social media side, as Dr. J was articulated, it's risky in the sense because that's where it's easy to conduct social engineering, right? Since one of today's topics is the human security aspect, right? The human as the endpoint almost. But I think also what often overlooked are these consumer-based tools that enterprises use. So, for example, WhatsApp, right? WhatsApp in Europe, in Latin America, WeChat in China, Telegram in Central Europe, Line in Japan, and so forth. That's where the users are, the customers are. That's where employees are. So organizations have created these business processes to use these tools that are like this weird gray privacy areas that mine is at the enterprise, but I conduct business on it. So it's strange, but the hackers know this and take advantage of this privacy gray area to ultimately breach the enterprise, such as we saw in Operation Sharpshooter or Pegasus and so forth. So, you have to think of them differently, and they bring to the table different concerns that the CISO has to take into consideration.
So, Dr. J, you and I were chatting for a couple minutes before we got started today about, a lot of people working from home. How concerned are you, and not necessarily at MasterCard, but just the world at large? You talk to a lot of CISOs, and you're familiar, at MasterCard with the small to mid-sized business community as well. How concerned are you about employees using apps that either they shouldn't be using, or just using apps that aren't secure, along the lines of the ones that we touched on?
So, very concerned. And I'm going to talk about this from two different areas. I'll split it in my mind in this way. One is application impersonation, and the other is user impersonation. I'm going to talk about user impersonation first. When Otavio was talking about the different social media and collaboration platforms, that's to me where user impersonation comes from. I can log in and I have you look me up on LinkedIn or on Twitter. You see I have all of these followers, right? And I pat myself on the back and say, yeah, I've got all these followers. I feel so good. But then there's user impersonation, right? Because I know for a fact that there is no integrity checks for the followers, right? And what I mean by that is I might have 5 Steve Morgans
Right.
that are following me. There's only one that is near and dear to my heart, but I might have 4 others who are impersonating the one that's near and dear to my heart. So that's user impersonation. That is really, really big across social media platforms. So that's one thing we have to really, really be careful about. When I think about application impersonation, what I am talking about from that perspective is if there's a lot of companies, and one of my biggest concerns right now is a lot of small businesses sometimes do this. Actually, large businesses do this too. But they may say, well, let me use and I'm just giving completely an example. Let me use my Gmail to authenticate into Facebook, or let me use my Gmail to authenticate into some other application. Well, once you do that, you're giving that application a token. And application impersonation means anyone who has access to that token can impersonate you and potentially get access to every other thing in your enterprise's back end. So if I'm using my corporate email address to authenticate into name your social media platform, now I have a persistent token that now I've given to a social media platform. And if I have someone really, really bad on the inside of that social media company, they could really look back into everything that my enterprise has. So that's why applications and application security is really, really important. You got to think about application impersonation. You got to think about user impersonation. And those are just two of the big things I think that are right now scary that are hitting me right now.
Otavio, let's try to bridge that to other CISOs, see if there's, some consensus. Your company conducted a very interesting survey about 600 senior enterprise IT and security professionals at companies that were between 100 million and $1 billion plus in revenue. Before I ask questions about that, what was the purpose of the survey? And did you personally, and did the company have a hypothesis before the survey?
Yeah, we were trying to just ask from our customers some of these questions that we're wrestling here, right? Well, what are you using? What risks do you face, and so forth. The thesis was that things have changed very fast because of COVID. This was conducted, by the way, in October of 2020, which is now, we find ourselves in a different situation, but that's when it was conducted. We saw a few surprising things. So, for example, they came back and said, okay, the most important tool that we have for revenue growth and transformation and collaboration are these new platforms such as Zoom. But they also said that's our biggest risk. And the second risk was it's our marketing stack, which to us was surprising that they had identified that as their second largest, right? So number one, collaboration tools. Number two, their marketing stack. But what was interesting in that survey was, we've done this before, and it comes back and says, oh, it's a financial system, it's a CRM, the classic critical infrastructure apps. Yet CISOs still don't rate those critical apps, right? And I think that's the disconnect. It's like, okay, there's two things here don't add up. If you really think it's important and you really think it's not secure, how come you don't think of it as your financial platforms, such as your SAP system, and invest appropriately. And that was the big aha for us, that there's an opportunity to educate in the marketplace here for sure.
So, Dr. J, I know you see, a lot of market hype, a lot of material, as I do too. This particular survey was very, very well done. I read it a couple of times. Our staff looked through it. So it's definitely a credible survey. One of the things that came out was around 60% of the respondents said that collaboration platforms such as Teams and Slack represented the most risk insofar as their tech stack. Whether that figure is accurate or not, in your opinion, how much of that is driven by the pandemic, just so many people working from home, using new tools, or would we be seeing that anyway, just as a natural evolution in what companies are adopting now?
I think we're seeing it faster. We would have seen it anyway, but I think we're seeing it at a faster rate, right? And because what I mean by that is there's so much more sharing. We really, through people, maybe, there may have been companies that were kind of slow rolling and walking their way into a lot of the collaboration platforms. And when the pandemic hit, they had to really run or jump, their way into the collaboration platforms. But when you think about them creating or representing the most risk, I really think of that from the insider threat perspective in terms of the information sharing that goes on, and then how do you protect that? A lot of companies maybe weren't prepared for a data loss prevention, or making sure that you can put certain restrictions, right? The digital restrictions around certain pieces of data, whether you can prevent people from printing, prevent people from saving, prevent people from uploading, prevent people from copying. All of those different attributes can happen with the right DLP and digital rights management solution. And I think that is why when you ask about representing the most risk, is because now you have to not only talk about your sharing and how you use that data, but then there are all of these different controls that you can put around each piece of data that maybe companies weren't ready to really grapple with. Now, digital rights management is going to be even more important especially when you think about collaboration platforms. Now I can say, hey, you can get on this collaboration platform and you can share, but you can't copy it. You can't paste it. There's no way I'm letting you print it at home. All of these different things now come into play. And that's going to be a bigger conversation, I think, as we keep moving along.
Right. So we started off the conversation talking about the colonial pipeline, and now we're talking about, another threat. And I look at the survey, and it says that 18% of respondents, and these are leaders, I mean, we're talking about IT and security leaders, leadership positions, only 18% of them cite security as a board level concern. That really, really surprised me. What was your take on that, Otavio?
I think the timing of the report is interesting, right? October of 2020. The board thinks in terms of growth and revenue and costs, right? As they should. And we had to launch Teams, we had to launch Zoom, we had to launch WhatsApp, we had to launch social media to survive in some cases. I mean, there was no 5-year plan for digital transformation. It was, let's jump into it, and this is the budget we have available. I think things are changing. I wouldn't be surprised if you were to conduct that survey now. That number is definitely up. In fact, there is a survey done by Metrigy. It was more recent now. This was March. Companies that protected these channels from a security and compliance perspective actually were able to have high employee productivity and 25% growth, right? So those numbers start trickling in. It becomes so much easier to go to the board and say, okay, we're not doing this for cost. We're doing this for growth. We're doing this for new revenue. And that will change that 18% that was, very reactive, right, to where we were in the pandemic.
Well, a lot of those security leaders and IT leaders could have been wrong, right? I mean, there may be 18% of them who view security as a board level concern. The actual number, insofar as how do CEOs and board members view it, could be altogether different.
Hmm.
So, Dr. J, I'd love you to chime in here. I could see your eyes lighting up when you heard that figure. I know in your world, you forced this, if it's not already there, as a board level issue. I was reading a report from Stanford University, and this was, I guess about 3 or 4 months ago. So the numbers certainly could have changed. But at that point, they estimated about 50% of the corporate workforce was working from home, and that's in the US. I'm not sure what it is internationally. And I'm thinking to myself, what CEO, what board member can't be thinking about security now? Whether
Right.
it's the CFO, exchanging messages with, remote employees. So what's your view on that?
So, when I think about the 18% that you talked about, and the number that the 50%, that you just talked about just a few minutes ago, post pandemic or during pandemic, I would have to say, and I really stand true to this, there was no CISO that said, aha, there's this new thing we need to do because of the pandemic. No, these are all things that we had been already talking about. They were already in our roadmap. Maybe we weren't getting the support. Maybe they were kind of lower priority because, there were higher priority technology challenges that maybe workforces were grappling with. But I would tend to think that if someone viewed it as not a board level topic, it's because it wasn't a new board level topic, that it was already part of the conversation. Boards and CEOs are already getting briefs on what is our risk, appetite, what is our risk posture, and how much are we able to consume. Those are now, this is not new anymore. Those are now brass tacks, standard conversations that are happening in the boardroom that I think all CEOs know have to happen in the boardroom. But it's not, I kind of go back and forth and say, what did cybersecurity professionals gain? And not being disrespectful to all of the pain that we suffered during the pandemic, but what did we gain out of this? Well, we gained a little more focus and a little more expediency towards some of the solutions that we were pushing. But it wasn't because those weren't already in our roadmap. A lot of those things were already in our roadmap, and they just kind of pushed it on along a little further.
Otavio, let me ask you about another figure I saw in the survey. Around 52% of the respondents indicated the biggest security and compliance challenge is the use of unsanctioned apps. And I definitely want to get a definition of, exactly what that means. Their concern was data theft, malware, other concerns. But what exactly does unsanctioned mean?
Yeah, I mean, um, you have to think in terms of that employee, right? They're at home, they want to get their job done, they want to get the job as fast as they can because they've got another thing to move on to. So I want to make the distinction that they're not unsanctioned as in the employee is rightly violating some sort of stated policy. It's just it's not accounted for, right? I'll give you, for instance, take WhatsApp. If I was to send a customer an email, maybe sub 1% of emails actually get read. Just the reality I think we all realize when you're reaching out to a person you don't know. However, in WhatsApp, you send a WhatsApp communication, 40% are read. The security team is then stuck with this dynamic where they can't now impede business, especially when everyone is trying to just do their best working from home, or at the same time, just turn a blind eye because they have, as this attack surface has fragmented, just like email, these are all other means, to get into the corporate network, right? Someone's at home, it comes in, moves through the VPN into the enterprise perimeter as you use these unsanctioned apps.
So, Dr. J, in the real world, Otavio is talking about the real world, but of course, he's coming at it from the standpoint of what they develop. You're familiar with a lot of CISOs, just a lot of organizations. So, what do they do when suddenly something like Slack shows up or WhatsApp shows up, and it starts to bubble up, and you have a large user base, but it's not necessarily sanctioned? Do you look to cut that out, or do you look to secure that?
So to me, it depends on the business case. There are many times where I look to cut it out. You could become a management nightmare trying to manage all of the different twists and turns of applications that are available to an enterprise. And like Otavia said, they come up, and then the way you get into them, and it's freeware. You can just, I mean, you could, it would be playing like whack-a-mole trying to handle unsanctioned apps. But what I would stress is, as a CISO or a security leader, you have to make sure that there's a process in place to say, what are the requirements? What are you trying to solve that these applications that we've already provided you have not solved? And then find out and make sure that process isn't too lengthy, right? Because that's what gets people to going to those unsanctioned apps as well. If they say, well, I've got to add security, and security is going to take 3 months, I could have already gone on the app and continued my work. That is what you don't want to happen. So we as security professionals have to be a little more timely sometimes in our approval of these apps and putting the controls around them and enabling them from a business perspective to do what our employees want them to do. But our employees, there's some give and take there. Our employees too have to say, well, instead of using this app, which I know and love at home, my office uses this app. I can settle for this one as well, since it has the security measures around it. There's got to be some give and take. That's kind of my belief.
Yeah. And and to build on Dr. J point, give me another example. So take Zoom, right? We're on Skype today, but might as well have been Zoom. So let's say, right, the organization says, hey, we don't support Zoom. Okay, we don't support Zoom. An employee understands that. But then a customer sends a link and says, hey, get on this sales meeting, right? There's a sales opportunity here. Here's the Zoom link. And then all of a sudden, okay, they have to escalate it. Can I join? Can I not? And Zoom has video and audio, and I can attach files, and I can do a chat. It generates all this data that now is owned by the company who sent out the Zoom link. Mm-hmm. So there's, it falls in that great, like, it's an unsanctioned app, but it's hard to stop these things real time.
So we can never have a conversation about, dealing with emerging threats and, looking at new tools without talking about money. I mean, it's inevitable. It's, it's part of the equation. According to the survey, and of course, this again was in the middle of the pandemic, 59%. So almost 60% of the respondents said that budget was their top concern, meaning they may or may not be able to get budget, even if they want to secure Slack and WhatsApp and these other applications. So, Otavio, what are you seeing? And do you think that as we emerge from the pandemic, we move to a better place around budget?
I think so. I think Dr. J made a statement that is so true. A lot of these things were already, in process, and they got accelerated. The end of the pandemic might be that opportunity to take a pause and really think in terms of long-term, 5-year horizon, as opposed to next month or next 5 weeks. Will give an opportunity to look for budgets that some kind of come from the business, right? And I think it's an opportunity for the security budget to grow when you can go to the business and collaborate with them on business cases. It might be a wildly optimistic, view in light of everything that's going on in the world right now, but I hope this becomes the case.
So, Dr. J, if I asked you to show us a list of what you're responsible for, like, it definitely wouldn't fit in frame on screen. I know it's just like, gigantic, and you're a CISO for many, many years at numerous organizations. So, you know what all of the other CISOs are up against. In the context of all that, everything from, security awareness training to endpoint security, and the list goes on. Where do you see collaboration tools and social and chat and the things that we're talking about today? Do you think that, we're going to see more budget open up in that area?
I think we are going to be talking about this for a long time. And my perspective of this comes from the fact that this was, and you were asking, about budget in the future, but we have to take into consideration this pandemic. and how it has affected us, and the surprise that it caused, the shock that it caused for a lot of companies, and the reactions that companies had to make. Um, when I think about that, that is going to sit with us for the next 3 to 5 years. And CISOs are going to say, I need more resiliency. I need to build more resiliency. I think we will have more budget for prevent and protect, right? There's a prevent, protect, detect, respond, recover. We're going to have a lot more budget for prevent and protect. And it would be my recommendation that we remember that prevent and protect part is data. We have to prevent and protect our data. And our data is on social media. It is in the collaboration and mobile chat apps. And so that's how I think we get to the attention of budget devoted to specifically those areas. It's from the prevent and protect and then moving it into that area.
So, Otavio, how much wiggle room do organizations have? I mean, you're watching this very closely. Obviously, you've developed a sophisticated platform to respond to a really big problem. Is it the end of this year? Is it the next year before, companies are faced with just, a growing number of users, more so than we have today? And, we definitely don't want to see a situation where, once again, we respond after there's a hack. We respond after, somebody, is using Slack and they shouldn't have, and, trace that back to, a major exploit.
No, absolutely. I think this has been kind of an educational journey, and for everyone we talked to, Dr. J said it very nicely, that this is not a problem that's going to go away, right? It is something we'll continue to talk about for many years to come. And the attackers are very well aware of this is where the employees are. This is where, they are on social media. So the social media companies are not equipped to be security companies. And email companies such as Microsoft, that produce email systems that we all use, still struggle with security 20 years in. So if you were to play it out, I think the awareness is still in process. When we started the firm in 2016, it was, and the invasion of Crimea was a lightning rod how social media could manipulate it and be used as a new attack vector, right? I think now would be surprised to find a CISO who doesn't understand that. But look, there's a lot of work to do. There's always new channels. There's an explosion of channels, and I don't think that a day goes by when we hear about a new one or a new threat actor who's figured out a technique in these channels. So, continue to be a challenge as those two things continue to collide.
So, Dr. J, to close out here, let me go back to, the pandemic. Are we, in your opinion, going to return to normal, or are we, going into a new normal? What do you think the world's going to look like? What do you think large enterprises are going to look like insofar as remote workers, next year, the year after?
I think it's a new normal. I don't see us going back. We will be going back saying, remember when? That's what we'll be going back saying. But I think it'll be a new defined normal. We, started out, and to be honest with you, I remember being at the White House. We transformed the new executive office building into open workspaces.
Huh.
I see a lot of that changing in the future. I see us being more. I think my spidey senses have gone up a little bit in terms of germs. I was not normally considered a germaphobe. I probably am now. I think you'll feel that a little bit more now in the future, which is going to kind of change how we work and what the future of work. So if you listen to some podcasts about the future of work pre-pandemic, they're going to sound very different from the podcast of future of work post-pandemic. That's just from going back and how we operate together. But then when you think about it from a cybersecurity and data perspective, I think we're going to talk a lot more about social engineering, because that's something that we didn't even really really talk about today. We talked about a lot of the technical aspects.
Right.
I might mention that on my Mastering Cyber podcast, just a small plug for that. But there's a social engineering aspect. There are a lot of policies that I think are going to change that are going to help us in this hybrid type of mentality. And I think that's what we're going to see moving forward, is something that's a little more hybrid.
Well, the two of you were great today. I'm tempted to, ask another question and keep going. But, when people look at YouTube videos and they're too long, then they're just like, no, I'm not going to watch this. So really appreciate having both of you. Dr. J, we love you. This is, why our audience loves you. So thank you. Otavio, look forward to continuing the series Human Sec with Safeguard Cyber.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. J. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Otavio.
I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime Magazine. Joining us today was Otavio Freire at Safeguard Cyber, the industry's first and only comprehensive collaboration, chat, and social media security platform. To learn more about Safeguard Cyber, visit safeguardcyber.com. Also joining us was Alyssa Abdullah, PhD, also known as Dr. J, Deputy Chief Security Officer and Senior Vice President of Emerging Corporate Security Solutions at MasterCard. To learn more about MasterCard, visit mastercard.com. You can keep up with all of our media at cybercrimemagazine.com.